Hi guys, welcome back to our last part of attachment. God, I feel like such a YouTuber. Like, please subscribe to my page. Like, you don't have to do that because that's really cringy. But I really hope they've been useful. I really hope you've been watching and making notes as you go, or watching them after once you have your notes. Either way, if somebody somewhere is benefiting from these, then I'm thrilled. I obviously would film myself, but that's too cringy, I can't do that. So this is my next best alternative. So final part before you sit your end of module assessment on attachment, just some questions or just a bit of a study to begin with them. So a bit of research by Bernier, looking at attachment types in 62 college students, 28 who are about to leave to begin university. After starting uni, they were assessed by questionnaire about the quality of their ongoing relationship with parents and about their family-related stress. So quite a common, quite a recent bit of research into attachment types, which is quite interesting, at a variety of different ages. Secure and avoidant students, no difference in relationship with parents between those who left home and those who didn't. Insecure resistant who left home had a sharp decline in the relationship quality with their parents. So think about what insecure resistant students insecure resistant is as an attachment type. What are some of the characteristics of it? Why might there be a bit of a decline in the relationship quality that they have with their parents? So what is this telling us about attachment? Well, it links quite nicely into our final bit, which is basically how attachment type can predict later development. So how you are classified as a child has quite a significant prominence on your relationships later on in life. And we've looked at a couple of bits of research into that, and we've talked about the idea that that's quite common. It's quite a common hypothesis in psychology that it does predict it. So we need to weigh that up, and we need to look at a few bits of research that support it and that go against it. So this section, the influence. So a question came up on this 2-3 years ago. I think they like this section because it's quite commonly forgotten. But we can still use quite a lot of the stuff that we've looked at already and bring it into this section, as we'll look at. So the influence of early attachment on later relationships. And this section is important because it brings in a lot of the researchers that we've already discussed. So Bowlby being a prominent one, his internal working model hypothesis. If you can remember, that's that mental framework for attachment. So if you have a securely attached, if you are securely attached as a child, it bases all of your other relationships on what you know. So what your family type is like, essentially. So primary caregiver is a prototype for future relationships. This mental representation guides how a person is going to be in future interactions and future relationships. So secure, you're positive, you're loved. Avoidant, unloved, maybe rejected. And then resistant, kind of angry, confused, not really sure what the relationship looks like. It can manifest itself in those ways. Oh, with a partner, wouldn't that be lovely? So how could different childhood experiences influence future relationships? What type of relationships do you think each attachment type would have? So you can have a think about that. Maybe write it on a post-it note if you really want to. But this is how it would look. So if you think back to those 3 attachment types that Ainsworth discovered from strange situation research, we've got our type B, which is secure. If you're securely attached as a child, you're most likely going to have the most beneficial relationships. So you seek out functional relationships based on trust and honesty and communication. Behave quite functionally with them, you're not crazy. Type A, so that avoidant type, kind of uninvolved. You don't get too emotionally close because it could be that you fear that rejection. And type C, so like insecure resistant, very controlling, very argumentative, quite stubborn, But hopefully you're seeing a problem with that. So a bit like we said with Ainsworth, how do you know that you fit into one of these types? You might have features of all of them. And then in relationships, I'm sure there's times where somebody who is a securely attached person feels quite, doesn't want to get too close, feels quite uninvolved in certain relationships. So it's quite difficult to be very specific as to how you're going to be. Well, that's quite dark. Hazan and Shaver is our key bit of research here on the love quiz, which I think I have attached for you to have a read of. And I've got on here for you to go away and do yourself, which would be interesting. So the procedure, people used to put ads in papers as to like a Lonely Hearts column. The love quiz is basically looking at 620 replies to a love quiz printed in a local newspaper. It's got 3 sections, this quiz, so it's a volunteer sampling method. We're putting it out there for people to choose whether or not they want to respond. Assessing respondents' current or most significant relationship, general love experiences, and assessing the attachment type by responding to one of 3 statements. So quite vague, really, as a way of trying to assess that, 1 or 3 statements. So using page 92 in the textbook, add some detail to the findings. How could you create like a little 5W or a little revision card for Hazan and Shaver? It's one of our key bits of research that we need for this section. So pause this and go and do that now. Then what I have for you is the love quiz. So you've got attachment there to go and do yourself. Remember 1987, I'm not sure how commonly used it is now, but go away and have a look. And this is kind of what it looks like. Oh, where's that skipping? That's very annoying. So that's what it looks like. So you've got some statements about our internal working model here. Avoidant, resistant, secure. And these are some of the findings from that to have a look at. So out of 620 replies, that's quite a large sample of individuals. We had 56% classified themselves as secure. Now we have to be careful with this research because it's self-report, isn't it? So you're getting people to fill out a questionnaire. They have to rate themselves. Are they going to be too generous or not generous enough? My thoughts are probably more generous than not. So 56% classified as secure, 25% as avoidant, and 19% as resistant. So the love experience and attitudes towards love, so their internal working model, was related to attachment type. So those who were securely attached believed that they could have a long-lasting relationship, they had trust, and they were less likely to get divorced or be divorced. And then those who were insecurely attached felt love was rare, they fell in and out of love really easily, they found relationships quite hard to maintain, and were more likely to be divorced. Now I'm hoping one thing you can see here is correlation. So just because the attachment type matches up with, or was related, their experience was related to the attachment type, doesn't mean that it caused it. There's always going to be that third factor, that third variable. So yes, it's a good bit of research. It's a good key indicator that early attachment has prominence in later life. But we've got a lot of things methodologically that we can pick out. It's a questionnaire. Correlation is not causation. Volunteer sampling. Okay, there's lots that you can talk about. Now this whole section is focused on research. So what kind of question they could ask you would be something like, describe and evaluate research into early attachment predicting later relationships, something like that. So what we would have done if we were in the classroom is you'd be a group of 3, you'd each take one and then feed back to your group, but obviously we can't do that. So what I have for you here are the types. are the research, so you haven't got to go away and pretend to work in a pair. So there's 3 types of research that we need to look at. Relationships in adulthood with romantic partners, relationships in later childhood, and relationships in adulthood as a parent. So how does early attachment affect these 3 factors? Okay. I'm losing my voice, I haven't spoken this much in ages. So starting with attachment type and later childhood relationships. So that's kind of friendships. 2 bits of research here that are really interesting is Kearns. So looking at securely attached children have the best quality friendships. Okay, again, a lot of this research is going to be correlational because they're probably self-reporting that they have really good friendships. And then they're trying to join the dots. Oh, they're securely attached, that makes sense. So that's something to be very mindful of. Whereas insecurely attached children had friendship difficulties. Maybe they were too overbearing or really couldn't be asked, so there's not really much of an involvement. But again, it's correlational. Myron, Wilson and Smith, a big sample size of 196 children, 7 to 11 from just London, so quite a specific area. Secure children are likely to be involved in bullying, whereas avoidant most likely to be the victims and resistant most likely to be the bullies. Now I want you to think why that is. So why could somebody who is avoidant most likely be the victims and resistant most likely be the bullies? So go back to the characteristics of those attachment types. Why might that fit quite nicely? And that's what you would want to discuss here. So you want to talk about that research, but make sure you're saying this shows us that, this means that. That extension is really important. Attachment type in adult romantic relationships. McCarthy, no, not Mr. McCarthy, unfortunately. 40 adult women assessed as infants for attachment type. So just a niche sample of 40 adult women. Securely attached had the best adult friendships and romantic relationships. Resistant had problems maintaining the relationships, and avoidant struggled with intimacy in romantic relationships. So again, interesting, but attachment type is just a drop in the ocean for things like relationships. There's loads of other factors that are going to be at play here. So that's something you can discuss. Then we've obviously got Hazan and Shaver here. So secure, most likely to have longer lasting, and avoidant, jealousy, fear of intimacy, whatever. So your key for any type of research, like I'm going to keep banging on about, is making sure you discuss the methodology and evaluation. It's really easy evaluation points to pick up. So the fact it was volunteer sampling, why might that go against it, or why might that be a strength? Okay, so you can really delve deep into some of this. Attachment type and parenting them. So Bailey considered attachments of 99 mothers to their babies and their own mothers. So how is that going to affect their attachment type, their internal working model? So they looked at the attachment with their children using the strange situation, and they asked them to self-report their relationship with their own mother. And the majority of women had the same attachment classification both to their babies and their own mothers. So we can argue here that attachment is kind of passed down through generations. You sort of learn how to behave based on your attachment, and then that becomes your internal working model for your own parenting style, your own relationship. And I find that fascinating because it kind of works in 2 ways. So I know some people are like, God, I'm never going to be like my parents. I'm going to bring my child up totally differently, which means that the internal working model, it doesn't fit every person. Whereas others are like, I had a great upbringing, great relationship with my parents. I'm going to bring my child up the exact same. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. There's individual differences based on your experiences as a child, but I think it does have some bearing in child rearing. fun group activities. Okay, so now we need to do the evaluation and application. So all of that research that we've just looked at is how early attachment develops and links to adult relationships. But now we need to pick it apart and do some evaluation on the concept of early attachment predicting later relationships. And there's 3 sections again. So evidence on continuity of attachment type is mixed. So the fact that it stays the same from childhood to adulthood. Most studies have issues of validity. We've kind of mentioned that already. And association does not mean causation. So the continuity of attachment, that's totally mixed. So McCarthy's research supports this idea of continuity, so it stays the same from childhood to adulthood. However, another research has completely disregarded that and found there's a very little relationship between the quality of infant and adolescent attachment. So many things change over time, and you change over time, the situation, that how can we be sure that it's the exact same? You know, relationships are constantly changing. They're very relative. This idea of issues of validity, so most studies aren't using the strange situation. They're using interviews and questionnaires, which they're asking them to self-report retrospectively, so from the past, which, you know, as we know from memory, is always hazy. It's always sort of reinvented every time we recall a memory. So it's not really the most internally valid way of collecting research. You know, like I said before, we're going to have some social desirability bias. People are going to be, it's going to be hard to be honest. You know, yeah, I really struggle with intimacy, or I'm really jealous. People aren't going to want to disclose that. So it makes it difficult to get really accurate results. And then we mentioned this already from the love quiz, but correlation doesn't mean causation. Parenting style might also affect the child's attachment style, but things like the child's temperament, their personality, is going to affect how people bring up their child. Oh, excuse me. So we have to be very careful with research that's trying to make this assumption, because there's always something else at play here. Oh yeah, you can do that actually. So using the evidence that we have, write a paragraph responding to the question, how important are early attachments for later relationships? So they do have some bearing, but I don't think it's as strong as some of the researchers want us to think it is. Oh, and then lastly, yeah, a really nice summary activity if, you know, you were all there. So what if Ainsworth never researched attachment type? And what if people base their relationships on their attachment types? So when I was younger, you know, I'm a Taurus, and I used to believe in horoscopes before I became a scientist. And I would never go out with anybody who wasn't a Scorpio, because that was my match. So can you imagine if we all knew our attachment type? And, you know, you wouldn't go out with somebody who was insecure avoidant. So you're kind of shunning them. It's a stigma, it's a label placed on people. Potentially a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, sociologists. You know, they might start taking on the role of an insecure avoidant person. So it's not necessarily socially sensitive, but it's something that we have to be quite mindful of, because it can affect people in a variety of different ways. I looked at quite a bit at child development in my first year at uni, and we looked at attachment types. And actually, if you are an insecure avoidant or resistant person and you're in a relationship with someone who is securely attached, you can change your attachment type. So they are relative to the person you're with, I think, and the situation you're with. If somebody makes you feel trusting and like you can be your total self and you feel respected, then attachment types are easily changeable. So that's something that we have to be mindful of for this section.